Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Monday, July 20th, 2026, episode 551, and we're going to talk about the limits of obedience. I looked back and I tried to see if I already did something on this topic, uh, because I was having a conversation with someone, and I was like, wow, this would be a great topic. But I think I might have worked it into a sermon, but I can't find the sermon. So I might have just not even had it written down, but just actually just ad-libbed it as I was preaching. But anyway, so as I said, I was having a conversation with someone, or I posted something on social media, and then I got a response from someone I had gone to seminary with a long time ago. And basically, I implied that one of the people that Hegseth had dismissed might have been dismissed. Like there was a lot of conjecture, might have been dismissed because he pushed back on some ridiculous order. And it was a bunch of people that were dismissed. And so he came back at me and he said, I know this guy, I served under him. There's no way he would have disobeyed an order or disputed an order. And I just replied to him, well, that's a shame, but a girl can hope, just kind of implying my sort of disfavor or dissatisfaction with what he said. But that there is still the possibility because it's not like he's in daily contact with that person. So I thought about it again because of the headlines that are coming out over the weekend, particularly, but the restart of the war. I mean, how crazy is this? So it reminded me because I started thinking about all these people who were involved to make this happen. Uh, and so they're getting these orders like, hey, we failed the last time. Nothing really worked last time. So we're going to do it again. Uh, it's just crazy. And so I started thinking about this expression, just following orders. I was just following orders. This is what I was told to do. And how weak that argument is. Um, but yeah, just following orders is probably more the argument that a coward would make, right? Because think about people who would try to push back. They would lose their job, right? Or if they blew the whistle, then they become a whistleblower. And then nowadays, if you're a whistleblower, you're a criminal and you're hunted down. And if you're lucky, you're just living in exile. If you're not so lucky, you get executed somehow or you die accidentally. Um, Also, think about the times when people use that as an excuse. I was just following orders. All the Germans who said, "Hey, I was just following orders." Hitler's orders, the Gestapo's orders or the Nazis' orders. Yeah, that did not prevent them from being executed. Which is also why I don't understand why Romans chapter 13 in the Bible, why that's such a big deal for Christians. There's very little justification for following an immoral or unjust order, right? So I don't understand how Christians can basically say, oh, God said we have to obey the government no matter what. Really, what if the government, you were living under Hitler? So you have to follow all of those orders, narc on all the people who are trying to help other people escape. It's just so weak. And it turns out that the heroes are the ones who disobeyed orders. Um, the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 1960s, there was a Soviet sailor, Vasily Arkhipov, who disobeyed an order. He was an officer on a nuclear sub. They were being depth charged by the U.S. Navy in '62, I believe, and they were like, "Okay, the war is on. We got to launch missiles." And he said, "No, we should just surface." Right. Just come to the surface. They'll stop depth charging us. What are they going to do to us? Especially if we're wrong and there is no war. And so instead of launching nukes, or maybe they didn't have nukes, instead of trying to sink the destroyers, uh, they surfaced instead. I don't think they had nuclear capable submarines at the time. I should have probably Googled that before I started, but at least I gave you his name so you can Google it yourself. But there was also another incident in 1983 where an officer, a Soviet officer, Stanislav Petrov, ignored an order, right? His computer said that the United States had launched a massive nuclear missile attack. And so his response was that he has to launch retaliatory strikes, which he did not. And apparently, he did not report the incident either. And so he saved the world as well. Both of these guys are Soviets. And the way that I grew up, uh, I was taught that those guys were all robots. They're communists. They're mindless. And they can't be very smart because why would you live in a communist system if you were bright? And so it's interesting how these two known examples, they're both Soviets. I'm sure there's probably similar examples on the US side, but we don't get to hear about it. Now, bear in mind, I understand the argument for following orders. One of my favorite passages in scripture is when the centurion says to Jesus, "Hey, you don't have to come to my place to heal my servant. Just say so. And I know it'll be done because, I'm under orders and I have people under me who follow my orders. I say it and it's done. So you're in control of this. So you say it and it'll happen, whether you believe in Jesus or not, miracles or not, it doesn't matter. But the point is that idea of following orders, being subservient to someone else's authority, I get that. I understand military discipline as well because life is on the line, right? Lives are on the line. Disobey an order because you're not in the mood, you don't feel like it, then it could result in death. But some orders are obviously stupid. I had a friend, a student, a former student, became a friend later, who was lifelong in the Army. And so he took my class because he was, I think, on the GI Bill, so he could take classes and get a degree. And he told me that one time a young officer, fresh out of West Point or something like that, ordered them to attack a position somewhere. But he disobeyed because he said everyone would get killed or a lot of them would get killed. And it was just a stupid order. It wasn't necessary. And so he didn't. And it turned into this huge fight. And I know enough that disobeying an order like that would mean you're in a lot of trouble. And I asked him, like, so how is he here? And he said, well, because other people backed him up. So other officers backed him up. And I guess when you're a senior non-commissioned officer, senior sergeant, you have some measure of sway. So, and there was another guy who was a Navy SEAL, and he was, we were talking about something else, and they started talking about fragging officers, right? And I thought that was kind of a myth, but no, I guess it actually does happen that in the heat of a battle, you pretend that your incompetent officer was killed by enemy fire, or you accidentally dropped a grenade next to this incompetent officer. And so you get rid of bad officers that way. In other words, it's sort of rough justice on the front lines. And by the way, whenever I had an ROTC student in my class, I would always tell them that story so that it would keep them in line so that they wouldn't die because of issuing a stupid order. And just as an aside, we'd have conversations, me and my ex-student, and I said, and he said that there were a lot of dumb young officers, and I said, well, I guess if I was in that position, the first thing I would do is I would talk to you guys. And I think he was just being nice, but he said, yeah, that's the kind of officer that I would follow, right? Someone who would get advice first, guidance before issuing an order, especially an order that is so, that involves death. Um, but anyway, a lot of people think that way. Clearly, our president doesn't care about the lives of servicemen and the people he's bombing. He just so doesn't care. Um, I guess in his head, his life is the only one that matters, right? But he did say that after rumors started going around that Iran is looking to seek revenge by taking his life, he mapped out this whole revenge plan. Oh gosh, come on. So everyone else's life is not worth as much as his. It's so insane to me. And building on that, Trump is threatening nuclear war. I mean, that's the implication. And there are stories coming out where he's asking about launch codes. And in spite of the obvious lack of qualification for the position of President of the United States, I just have to keep reminding myself he's just a puppet. Someone is pulling his strings. But still, he, as a person, as an individual, is going to be responsible for everything that comes out of his mouth, everything that he has done. And I think there's hell to pay for that. You know, I don't, obviously I'm not the one to judge, but I mean, if there were ever was a person who who is really engaging in a lot of evil activity, I think that would be one. I mean, just the total disregard for human life. Um, yeah, that just bothers me tremendously. It's obedience to orders that has given us this stupid war of choice, and it's escalating. Colonel Douglas McGregor, he said that he published an article recently, War to the Last Missile. And talk about missiles, ammunition is running low. And yet, Trump is promising escalation. And there's so few targets that the United States can, uh, blow up that they're now targeting civilian targets, right? Bridges, energy, things that affect civilians. These aren't necessarily of high military value, but they are there to, if you blow them up, that the people will get angry. A lot of people will die. And so maybe it will spark some sort of revolution, civil war in Iran. And Colonel Daniel Davis, who also has a channel on YouTube, talks about the bombing results and that uh, a lot of these uh, damaged facilities are repaired relatively quickly, at least on the Iranian side. Whereas the targets that the Iranians are bombing will take years to recover. So the retaliations are much more painful than what the United States is inflicting on Iran. And part of me was wondering why isn't there more bombing from Iran to targets around the Gulf? And then I heard someone else talking about how Iranians are bombing Kurds in Iraq, uh, and they're really going after them heavily. And that's because the United States is talking to the Kurds in Iraq to rise up against Iran, supplying the weapons and whatnot. And all of this is stuff we're paying for, right? Which further just bothers me. And then this morning, Yemen announced that they're going to blockade uh, Saudi Arabia. So oil that was coming out of the Red Sea, that's going to stop now as well, which further um, escalates the seriousness of the oil crisis that we have, which is going to be a diesel crisis soon, apparently, which is partly why I'm trying to get all my orders in now before there is some kind of diesel crisis. Because of obedience to orders, we have all this inflation, right? The Federal Reserve just doing what they're told, just printing all that money so that the government can do whatever corrupt endeavor that it wants. Print more money to settle sexual assault charges in Congress. Print more money for Epstein and his ilk. Print more money so that we can basically pay all the people in Ukraine and Israel because they can't work anymore. Keep the wars going. It just kind of, it's insanity, really. And meanwhile, China is increasing their pace of buying gold. I mean, it's a record amount last month. Japan uh, is increasing, raising interest rates on their savings bonds, which increases the incentive to ditch treasuries. If you know about the yen carry trade, that's collapsing, which is going to put pressure on the West as well. And then Israel, interestingly, I noticed this, and then someone talked about it, how Israel is not in the news. Normally, if there's all this exchange of missiles going on, Israel then does something sneaky, like steps up their attacks in Lebanon or whatever, which I'm sure they're still doing, but it's not something new, right? So why is this all so quiet in Israel? Well, aside from the fact that a lot of people speculate that the damage in Israel is far, far greater than they let on, but it seems that, and I think Larry Johnson was saying this, that Iran is first going to take care of America, drive them out of the Gulf first, then they'll take care of Israel. Then they'll do something about Israel. Let's not forget about Russia. That's steadily increasing their attacks against the Ukraine. And neither Iran or Russia seem to have an ammunition problem, which the United States clearly does. The United States does not have the industrial base that it used to, and so they cannot produce munitions, ammunition, missiles, and whatnot at the pace that they need to if we're going to have a sustained war. And as I mentioned last time, they need rare earth minerals in order to make a lot of their missiles, which apparently they've run out because China will not trade those goods any longer. And I guess there is a lag in time for when the United States can source those materials from someplace else. So Europe also is trying to have a war with Russia, which is kind of crazy because they're not in any position to go to war with anybody. So, all looking at all of this news, none of it makes sense. And you've got to ask yourself, what is the end game? What is the goal? What's the objective of all of this fighting and bombing and whatnot? And nothing makes sense. Like I've listened and I've tried to listen to people for some sort of explanation what might be the goal and the stated goals of the Trump administration and the news media of getting the Strait open. Well, that can't be the goal because that's the way it was before the war started. So clearly, anything coming out of the White House and the Department of Defense or war is just something they're just making up as they go along. But the actual point, what was the actual goal? You could say regime change. Well, that's not working. Anything that they're doing right now is further solidifying the power of the people um, who are on top right now. So the only thing that seems plausible, possible, is that the war itself is the goal, just to have a war and to crash the system, right? The financial system where so many Western countries are in debt to their children's eyeballs um, so that they can have a reset, right? So all these people owe money to each other. It's you can't pay it back. None of these debts can be settled. So what's the solution? Crash the system. I don't know. It's so crazy. Could it be true? But maybe it is. Um, most of the speeches that I hear, uh, it's like listening to clowns making an argument. Like it's got to be a joke, but it's not a joke, which makes it not funny. Can they really believe this? Is this really what they believe? And I can't, a lot of people would just say, well, that's stupid. Well, maybe to us publicly, those are the statements that they're going to say. And people of, very little desire to think, uh, believe it. But I mean, there's no way. It doesn't make any sense. And so, is this the goal? To have a war, push it to the point where everything falls apart, and so then you can just announce a new financial system? I don't know. I I don't even know what to say to that. It's just that I have no proof against it. But given that all of the other possibilities don't make any sense, and that this is somehow a little bit plausible, I'll just keep it in the back of my head for now and make a little preparations, take some preparations, make some preparations in the event that it actually is what they're up to. I don't know. But that's it for today. I will talk to you next time.